Hey, coaches, let's get to work on getting to work with the habits that we'll be coaching around with their clients. The getting to work really does start with learning and studying the habits, but after the client has shared and they feel like they have a good sense of how to visualize or how to understand the habits that they have in place, we get to a spot where we need to begin making some adjustments. Now, these adjustments do not need to be major. When working with various clients, sometimes there's a sense when working with a coach, and I've seen this more with like young clients, asking questions that help them begin the experimentation process can feel almost a little bit too slow or too tiny, too atomic, whichever habit framework we might be using. I often would hear some of my younger clients say things like, I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna make this change. Of course, only to come to the next session, having shot for the stars and not hit the moon or the atmosphere, whatever it might be. Helping a person experiment correctly, experiment with the right amount to really get at the attainable level and the relevant level of experimentation is important because not only is coaching around habits, it's not only is it helping the person change, it's helping them build a motivation that leads to the change. And we've seen this in some of the frameworks. I think BJ Fogg is really great about his work on what makes a behavior, what really makes motivation for changing behavior work. And a big part of that is celebrating success. And when a coach doesn't challenge a client to set the right type of experimentation and adjustments, and they're like, oh yeah, just go ahead and make the big change, and they come back a bit defeated, that's another tick down on their motivation and their energy towards the behavior change. So we do want to be careful. We want to be mindful that a coach's role is to challenge, and part of that challenge is to recognize that this intention of making a habit change is oftentimes very challenging. So we need to share with them the general framework that usually works, and it's based on multiple frameworks. It's not mine. This is just kind of a combination of multiple ones. And after we've studied the habit, the next thing is to begin experimenting with that habit in order to learn about it. That distinction is great, and it's very important to bring up with the client. Anytime we're sharing something about a framework, anytime we're sharing about what might work in general, because that's often how you would set the stage around coach around behaviors and habits, you do need to use that direct communication of permission or partnership, share succinctly, hand off with an open question. So now that we have kind of the foundation in place to really begin coaching around experimentation, let's talk about ways to experiment with habits. So we get into the second or third session around this particular habit the person wants to put into place or adjust. Now let's begin looking at some adjustments. One of the most basic ideas is around the cue or the trigger. So what is that cue? And if that cue or trigger is something that's environmental, how can they maybe just take that out? So as a coach, we may say one of the main aspects here is this trigger. What could you do differently in order to decrease the likelihood that you will be triggered into this habit? What could you change about your environment, about where you place your things, what you have in your house, where you set up your exercise equipment, and so on, in order to adjust the way your cues are working? This is a situation within coaching where the coach is bringing an idea from the field of habit formation, and we really want to ask the questions in a way that's not too leading. So we might phrase these types of questions around the cues like, one of the things we could work on are cues. So the questions I could ask here are, where could you put your exercise bike in order to make it more likely that you would use it? Or what could you change about the amount of snacks that you have in your house? These types of questions can help adjust the trigger or the cue that's going to help you with your behavior change. Now, that's a way we could begin working on experimenting with this habit. Would you be interested in talking about your triggers and cues? Okay, great. That's a bit long-winded, but that's the idea. You give them a sense of where we could go in order to make some change. One of the most basic things to do is to look at the cue. One of the most basic things to do is look at the trigger and can it be adjusted? We want to be careful not to say, hey, I think you should not have any snacks in your house. Instead, we want the person that we're coaching to have that voice for themselves to identify what they really want to change and what they might like to do differently with that cue or routine. On the flip side, we might coach around identifying a new cue. Again, with this, you would set up an expectation using direct communication that maybe we could look at creating a new trigger or identifying a trigger that is currently in place, a routine that's in place, the idea of what comes after from BJ Fogg. So we can look at that idea with the coaching. Would you like to go there? Okay, great. What is a current cue, routine, action, trigger that you already have in your morning, already have at night, that you could piggyback off of in order to insert this new behavior? So identifying a new cue for a good behavior. Then we can look at brainstorming. Brainstorming is a great way to identify the sub behaviors that could be adjusted. If the studying and learning has surfaced a lot of information, it can be good for the coach to set aside some time with the client to talk about what are those behaviors. Let's maybe write them all down, all the little behaviors that are part of the general habit they would like to change. I would like to eat better. I would like to stop eating all the junk food and eat better. Okay, great. But that's a huge general habit. Let's break down all the little pieces and find what's most relevant for us to work on. And with that in mind, then we can make adjustments to that piece. Another way we could implement brainstorming is to look at the additional or new habits that the person would like or the client would like to put into place. This is the idea of atomic or tiny, minuscule, little behavior changes that can create a sense of success. So, what might that little amount of success, what would it look like? How might they be able to implement that? Where would that be inserted? And how would they know that they should increase the difficulty with that? You get the idea of BJ Fogg's going to the restroom and doing 2 push-ups. That simple little tiny habit, we could brainstorm around those types of new behaviors in order to experiment with them. Again, as a person's experimenting with this little adjustment, it's all about the learning. What did they learn as they attempted that? What was challenging? What worked well? What did they do to celebrate? And what did they enjoy about the process? That idea of celebration is another thing that we can brainstorm. And with celebration, as BJ Fogg often will talk about in his book, he mentions it. It's great to, like, within an actual conversation you're having with the person that's wanting to do behavior change, to practice the idea of celebration within the session. And that's a great idea, even though it will feel a bit awkward. It can help the person get a sense of the value of celebration. And if there's any way that you could have them simulate doing the activity, particularly if the object that they want to have a good behavior around, like if they want to read more books or something, they have a book nearby where they are doing their coaching session. If you can help them do that tiny behavior live at their desk and then celebrate, that's gold if you can facilitate that. But helping them simulate the celebration that they would like to do in session, again, is a great way to engage them and help them get a sense of how they could begin experimenting with the reward part of the habit loop or habit system framework that we're looking at. And with that, we can look at alternative rewards. So if a person is wanting to adjust their behaviors around alcohol, and again, we've talked about there's a difference between behavior change around addictions versus regular habit formation. And I've coached some people around, I want to stop having, a glass of wine each night, or I want to decrease the amount of glasses of wine. Usually it's glasses of wine that I do coach around, because if it's more than that, that's a little bit dicey. But in those types of conversations, we will look at maybe some alternative rewards. What do they really get out of the experience of performing this habit, taking that drink, and what might be some alternatives that they would appreciate? So we can help brainstorm some alternatives and, again, experiment with that. With the Power of Habit with Charles Duhigg, he did this type of experimentation with the cookie, where he looked at what's the real part of this behavior where the reward is. So is it taking the walk outside? Is it eating a chocolate bar? Or is it socializing? And it turns out that the actual reward came from the socializing part of the behavior. Well, let's dig into that and build an alternative reward. And in his case, it was to gossip hard with his coworker at a nearby desk in that critical 3 o'clock time frame. So we can create these alternative rewards in order to help facilitate the habit formation as well. Another thing that we can do with habit coaching is to help a person identify a keystone habit. If they want to create a whole new routine for themselves around exercise and health, what is the one small little bitty adjustment that they can make, that tiny little new routine they can put into place that is going to signal success towards bigger change? So it could be doing the sheets every morning, putting the sheets on the bed, or putting that pot on the stove, I think, as BJ Fogg says. It can be something as simple as doing the 2 push-ups after going to the restroom, or making sure to at least get on the exercise bike once a day. Whatever that keystone or core behavior is going to be, let's help the client identify what that could be and experiment with it. As they're experimenting with this over a week, what did they notice they did because they were already there? Or what did they notice they did because they had accomplished putting the pot on the stove? No other expectations were set, but if they consistently did that 6 out of 7 or 7 out of 7 times this past week, what was the result? Did they go on to make more breakfast? Did they go on to actually use the exercise bike? And if so, how long? Study through these experiments. Help them learn through them in order to build stronger habits. Another thing, and I think I've already mentioned this, but just good to reiterate, it's good to challenge the client on how they would like to increase the intensity or the amount of push-ups they do, or the expectations around the habit that they have in place. Usually, though, this needs to come a little bit more in the sustaining side of the coaching framework that we're talking about here, where the person's demonstrated a good amount of success. They seem to be growing in their ability to follow through. We want to not challenge them. They need to increase their repetitions or make things harder for themselves. We just want to surface how will they know when they should increase the expectations with the habit. And a big thing from Charles Duhigg is that the planning around something that's going to be tough, just planning around that interruption, the obstacle, the distraction, that often will help. And that's a perfect place for the coach to support the client in getting ready for the experimentation. As you imagine this next week, what are some potential obstacles that could get in the way of following through with this little bitty keystone or simple tiny habit? Okay, great. What would you do if you were to visualize yourself stepping into that room and seeing the exercise bike, but you have that distraction on your mind? What would your routine be, or what would your decisions be in order to help you get on the exercise bike? If you don't see a pot to put on the stove, what will you do in that moment? And as you imagine yourself doing that, what would you say to yourself in terms to celebrate your success, and so on? And I'm kind of making too many off-the-cuff questions here, but you get the idea. Helping them visualize and imagine themselves going towards the habit that they want and seeing a bit of an obstacle. What are they going to do? These questions are very important to help the person be prepared for the challenges that can come with habit formation. As you've heard all these, I hope that you do get the sense that coaching around habits can take a lot of different directions. So keep in mind these options and take a look at some of the additional resources that are available this week to help you organize your thoughts and help you be present in the moment with your client during a session around habits, but to have a way to look at some options of exploration as well. So I hope this is helpful. Thank you again for tuning in, and thank you for coaching.